Welcome. I just got done teaching a little mini workshop over in the Faith Deconstruction Cafe and thought I would pop in because you have heard me talk about faith deconstruction a lot. We talk about recovering from religious trauma, um, all the things. And I realized it's been a while since we have actually talked about what faith deconstruction is, what it isn't, and if there's a perfect way to do it. So I thought we would just have a little chit chat today. For those of you who don't know, I'm Angela J. Harrington. I'm a faith deconstruction coach and host of the Deconstructing Faith Summit and the Faith Deconstruction Cafe over on Facebook. So I'm glad you're here. Happy to share a little bit of my experience. I've worked with hundreds of clients over the last few years, and deconstruction is really it's more visible than it used to be. I think that there's a lot of people who mistakenly label it as a fad or something new and sexy, usually the critics. But it's actually been around for a long time. And I think that it's just a newer label for something that has been part of Christianity, possibly other faiths, since day one. So let's just dive in. What the heck is faith deconstruction? Well, here's the thing that is a little frustrating for some people, but actually gives us a lot of freedom. There is no one perfect set definition for faith deconstruction. People have different definitions, right? The idea of deconstruction is taking big ideas and questioning them and breaking them down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. It's not necessarily like an explosion. It's not necessarily a demolition, but it is a breaking apart to examine things. So that's kind of the philosophical idea behind deconstruction. What does it mean in a faith deconstruction space? Well, faith deconstruction is a taking apart. It is a like sifting and sorting of what you believe. Some people think that deconstruction means moving towards a lack of beliefs. Other people think that deconstruction is just a way of refining your existing beliefs. So there's a huge range in between those. And then there's some other definitions that don't necessarily line up. But at the heart of all of the definitions that I've seen, or at least the majority, let's say the majority, is examining what we believe and looking for what's true and sacred. Excuse me, hang on. Allergy season is here. But it's about examining what is true and what is sacred and what isn't. Okay, so for the majority of us here in the States, deconstructing is going to include decolonizing. It's going to include diving into why we marginalize queer people. It's going to include understanding how gender bias plays out in a lot of different spaces. Those are all parts of deconstruction. The other things, there's a lot of other things. Do we believe in hell? Is hell actually a real thing? How has the Bible been used effectively, and how has it been used to weaponize these beliefs against people to support the system and to oppress, again, people who are typically marginalized by the church? So there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces to it. What I'm going to really encourage you to do is to not get lost in the weeds of figuring out what deconstruction means and how is everybody doing it and who's got the right answers and who's got the best answers. And okay, deconstructing means taking a baby step back from all those systems who have taught you to be so compliant and have taught you to turn to experts and pastors and leaders for all the answers. And instead, taking that step back and looking around and listening to yourself and evaluating ideas for yourself. It doesn't mean that you're out there like willy-nilly making things up. What it means is that you get the say. You have autonomy. You have the right to self-govern. And so when you look at a Bible passage, instead of just taking one person's opinion on that particular Bible passage, you do a deeper dive. And you say, okay, this has been one of the guiding passages of my life. Is it possible that the meaning has changed, right? Is it possible that what I was taught was actually not how readers would have understood it 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, or longer, of course, if it's Old Testament? It's getting into that yourself. And I think that's really intimidating for a lot of people because you may feel like you've got to be a theologian. You may feel like you've got to have these huge degrees and you've got to be able to like do super deep dives. But the truth is, you don't. Okay. There are a lot of good resources out there. And the key is to make sure that you're drawing in resources from lots of different places that represent different perspectives. Because if you only go to the resources that have been created and are approved by the system you're already in, it's just going to be reinforcing those beliefs you already have. So challenge yourself to go out and find other resources. Challenge yourself to read articles from people who are taking completely different stances on passages and things that the church, that the toxic religious environment says they are 100% certain on. Okay. In addition to the head knowledge, in addition to sifting and sorting those beliefs and understanding concepts in a different, more holistic way, deconstruction is also about unlearning all the behaviors that were driven by those beliefs that you used to think were absolute. Okay, so an example would be when you start to learn the how much white supremacy and colonialism is actually it's baked into the foundation of the church. When you start realizing that, then it provides a slightly different, it just casts a different light on some of these complaints today about the church still perpetuating those harmful things. Because instead of saying, oh, it was never built on that, that it was built on that. And it gives you a little more incentive to examine your beliefs and how they're playing out in the day-to-day. So when you see that those beliefs are rooted in unhealthy things, you can change your beliefs, but you also have to change your action, right? So you're unlearning the behaviors that are rooted in those unhealthy beliefs and even those unhealthy relationships. And that's why deconstruction can be so isolating, because it's not just a head knowledge thing. It's actually a reset. It's a hard reset on what you believe and how that plays out into the day-to-day. But the good news is that heavy lifting, that unlearning and that sifting out of things that aren't healthy makes a lot more room for the expansion of what is good and what is holy. Okay. If you can push the legalism, if you can weed out the legalism that's in your life, there's a whole lot more space for healthy relationships. Now, whether that's with the Christian God, whether that's with something completely different, or whether that's with no kind of Godhead figurehead at all, that's up to you, right? Because when we filter out all these pressures to perform or to be in that old system, we reclaim our autonomy and our right to self-govern. And if you think about it, so much of what's taught in the church is about free will, but free will requires us to have autonomy and the right to govern ourselves. And so in deconstruction, you're saying, okay, what if I actually do have free will? What if I do actually have the right to self-govern and the right to ask questions without this punishment that these religious spaces are always saying is going to happen next? Okay. So allowing us to weed those things out, weeding all those things out gives us this space. It allows us to say, what else is here? So rather than playing very, very small and fitting into a box and trying not to upset the systems, we get to embrace a season of exploring what's holy and what's sacred. Whether it aligns with the old church structure or not is less important than whether or not it helps us feel connected to our creator. However you view creator, higher power, divine, God, that's what a spiritual life is about, right? And developing that flourishing spiritual life is what typically is on the other side of deconstruction. Now, be honest, the middle is a wilderness, and it is hard and it is sometimes heavy, but it really is essential to moving away from this really oppressive system that so many of us were raised in and moving towards a space where curiosity is welcome and questioning is welcome, and learning to trust yourself is a priority, not just something that happens occasionally, but it's actually a priority to learn how to self-govern and how to self-regulate and how to motivate yourself by things other than the potential trauma and rejection that comes with that fire and brimstone teaching that's out there. Okay. one of the things that happens a lot of times when you start deconstructing is you lose your community. You get a lot of pushback. You get a lot of people who are now othering you and lumping you into this bucket of people who just aren't Christian, right? You're a heretic, you're a Jezebel. I get called that one from time to time. And you're teaching things and you're exploring things and you're talking about things that are supposed to be, air quotes, supposed to be off limits, okay? And with that comes rejection. And so in the beginning of your deconstruction, especially when you start talking about it publicly or in your friend circles or in your faith circles, it can be very isolating. And there's a lot of pressure to give up and to go back and just kind of shut down all those conversations you're having with yourself. But what I want to encourage you is to keep going, because anytime we change a behavior or we push back against a system that we've been in for a very long time, there's going to be resistance because it feels unsafe. Trust the fact that even though it feels unsafe, and it may be unsafe in some of your relationships, that you actually have the ability to keep yourself safe in this process. And there are a lot of us out here who are in this space and are more than happy to hold space for you and to encourage you and just to provide you a high five for doing the hard work, because the goal of deconstruction is to move towards flourishing. That's my definition, is to go from kind of suffocating under the weight of legalism towards flourishing without anybody telling you what your flourishing has to look like, right? So when we talk about the narrow way, we talk about this one path that you have to follow to live a good and holy life and to get the rewards of heaven and to avoid the eternal punishment of hell and to make sure all our kids are okay. Like, that is really oppressive. And it is also all about protecting the system that benefits from having a bunch of people thinking the same thing. Okay. So bottom line here is that there is no one perfect way to deconstruct. There is no one definition. Some people hold it as a very logic-based, brain-based thing. Other people are kind of in the same boat as me, where I say, yes, logic-based stuff is super important, and I want you to use your brains and your critical thinking skills. But if it doesn't change your behavior, you're only halfway there, right? And then there are other people who tell you deconstructing is fine as long as you still believe in the Judeo-Christian God. As long as you get there and you believe in God and you believe in Jesus and you believe in as long as you tick these 10 boxes, deconstruction is okay. What I want you to hear in this video, in this little mini workshop we're doing, is that nobody gets to control deconstruction. Not even you. You can say yes to it. You have lots of choices. You have the right to self-govern. You have the right to decide what your next steps are. But if you're trying to control the outcome, if you're trying to say, I'm willing to deconstruct as long as I end up over here, as long as I preserve my faith, or as long as I don't lose my friends and family, or as long as I still fit into my church community, it's going to be really challenging, because it's harder to lower your walls and be vulnerable and be in those messy conversations if the thing you're focused on is set in stone, is set in concrete. Which is why I use flourishing, because flourishing is something that's wide open. It's about moving into a healthier state, and you get to determine what that healthier state looks like. And it may not be the same for me or for you. Cool, we're different people, so of course we're going to need different things, but be really, really careful about trying to put deconstruction into a mold it was never meant to be in. Okay, so trying to control it, trying to say this is what deconstruction is going to look like for me, can lead to a lot of frustration, and it actually amps up a lot of your self-doubt and really messes with your self-confidence, which those are things that do not flourish in unhealthy spaces unless you happen to be the one at the top of the food chain. Okay, so that's what faith deconstruction is. That's kind of the core of what it is and what it isn't. It's not a cool, sexy thing. I don't remember who said that anymore. It's not a cool, sexy thing. It is not a personal attack on the church. I know a lot of people who are deconstructing that just wish the church would do the same, right? And there's a lot of grief that gets poured out over how the church treats people and how the church exists and what the church tends to focus on, rather than moving towards flourishing as an organization. So that's kind of the bottom line of what deconstructing is, what it isn't. I would be happy to support you. As I mentioned, the Faith Deconstruction Cafe is the free Facebook group that I run that I would love to support you in. You can also find out more about coaching. There's some free programs. I've even got a quiz to help you sort of figure out where you are in deconstruction that provides a whole bunch of free and low cost resources picked out just for where you're at. And you can find that at angelajharrington.com, as well as the link to join the cafe if that is something that would feel supportive. Wherever you're at in deconstruction, whether you've started, whether you've been doing it for 20 years, or you're somewhere in the messy middle, keep going. Trust yourself. You absolutely can do this, and you absolutely deserve to be free from all that stuff that's making you small. Talk to you again soon.